Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning and welcome back to today's session. I have the role of trying to set up a little bit of the theme for today and reflect to begin with a little bit about what we did yesterday first. I hope you had experienced some of Dublin's wonderful food and Guinness. We've already had the rain, so I think we've got the full Irish and Dublin complement this morning. I think if we look at yesterday, and hopefully the slides for yesterday will come up shortly. So I think that my impressions of yesterday were some inspirational speakers, some really, really good ones. And of course, as you will remember, we were talking about the rules and the rails of the game yesterday. I think what I took out of yesterday was actually, I thought some really inspirational speakers. I think it just rekindled my desire to try and make some things happen. We were told to be bold. We were told to be pioneers. And I think there was inevitably there's a sort of call for action. To me, though, today is much, much more interesting because today is about reframing the problem that we have to make sure that we can address some key issues that we sort of face. And I want to give you a couple of examples about why I think reframing matters so much. And there are going to be one theoretical one and two practical ones. So the theoretical one is, when I was much younger, I got interested in an author called Edward de Bono. And Edward de Bono is well known for coining the phrase lateral thinking. And the reason why he claims, and I think since it's been substantiated, the reason why lateral thinking matters is there is a perception generally held that we solve problems by using a linear sort of process to do so. So that we state our problem and we have the solution as a sort of end goal and we move in logical steps between that problem and that solution. And his thesis is that actually there's a problem with that. And the problem is that our brains don't work sequentially and don't work logically. And therefore, actually, what we should do is allow them to work how they work best, which is much more as a sort of random sort of process. And he invented methods to actually, and they're mostly humorous ones, which is perhaps why one of our activities later on could be very useful. But he invented these processes and these methods to sort of unlearn this sort of demand that we were having for looking at a sort of logical process. And there are a number of sort of examples to that. One that I think he gave, or maybe it was somebody else, was the problem faced by an early builder of a large tower block. And that tower block had 2 lifts. And at the early part of the day, the problem was there were so many people in the lobby waiting for the lifts, they were getting very, very unhappy. So the problem was addressed by the engineers as well, should we try and see if we can build some more lifts? Shall we make the lifts run faster? Will they be sick if we can make them run too fast? Is it safe if they run too fast? So they used a logical process to try and address that problem. And somebody came along and said, I think we're thinking about this the wrong way. We need to reframe this problem. And so what they did was not trying to increase the volume of people you could get into those lifts. What they did was they said, why don't we just make them happier so they don't complain? And they put a whole lot of mirrors in the lobby, and everybody spent most of their mornings looking in the mirror to make sure they looked good, and they didn't worry about the fact they were taking 20 minutes to get up to the floor where they were having to work. So there's a sort of simplistic example about what Edward de Bono was trying to do. I have a couple of my own, and when I started Oasis Loss Modelling Framework, you've seen that one up there, right? When I started it, several people said to my face, what you're trying to do is impossible. You cannot build the type of software that we were talking about building. And therefore, and some very large companies said to me, well, it's a nice idea, but you can't do it, so we won't support you, financially or in any other way. And I'm not entirely sure whether it was I had a different frame for this. I just decided that actually that this problem that they perceived wasn't a real one and we could fix it. And 2 years later, we produced the first version of the software, and it's now used by dozens of companies all around the world to solve some complex problems around weather and climate risk. But my point is, so many people to my face and more behind my back were saying, you cannot do this. And it was the frame of it's impossible that actually can be a real problem for what we're trying to do the next 2 days and trying to solve here. And actually, yesterday, while I was enjoying all the speakers were speaking yesterday, the gentleman from Nordea Bank made this statement that actually this problem is a simple one to solve because there are, and I've forgotten the exact number, 120 odd companies around the world that are producing the most significant amounts of carbon. So we just stop them and we stop the problem about pumping carbon into our atmosphere. My initial reaction to that was, it's not that simple. It's not that simple because there are social constructs, there's a culture, there are laws, there are a whole range of other things that says you cannot do that. So my initial reaction was you can't do that. And then when I was thinking about today's theme about reframing, I sort of slapped myself and said, you're doing exactly what other people did to you. So I think that, that's really important to solve some of these big problems, is not to be beholden to our existing culture, our existing view, our existing experience. We've got to look to others that may be able to reframe that problem in a way that actually gives us an insight into answering that problem. Which doesn't mean, by the way, and I find myself doing this quite a lot. Oh, you got that one too. We do this quite a lot, which is I find myself sometimes saying, don't think it's impossible, because it is perfectly possible. And I sometimes can see this because I have a different perspective from others, and I've got perhaps a broader range of experience than some people I work with. But I can also sometimes see this because I think there's a role to say, even if you have a huge goal, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try and unpick what the problems are. And I was talking to Scott this morning about, how many people are part of the mission that we have that have a psychological or sociological background. Because actually I think that part of the problems we need to solve, or part of the solutions that we need to have for these problems, is going to be involving the understanding of cognition, cognitive biases, how you change people, how you change society. Because if we did do that, then actually the problems that we have could be significantly less. So today, I think, is actually really, really important, and more important than yesterday. And we've got a few things later on, so I just want to sort of do a little bit of housekeeping. So we're going to have a session in a minute, which I'm going to introduce. But after that, we've then got 2 sessions at 11. So there's a serious risk game in here, which is why there's some tape spreading out the seats. So if you want to do the serious risk game, please do stay here. If, however, you're interested in 7 pitches on new financial vehicles where there are going to be some cash rewards, you have to go to the Podle room, which is round that way. So after this next session, that's what happens, and there's no tea break in between. So moving around swiftly to the next session will be important to make sure we get through everything here today. So thank you very much for your attention this morning. I'm looking forward to joining you in some of these activities later on. And I want to introduce Sergeant Sandra Dixon-DeClerve again, who's going to come back on stage and introduce the next session. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much. Have a great day.